Barry is, as everyone knows, he's the last one of the four kids. He was born 2 days before our anniversary. He was born on September the 1st, and our anniversary, our wedding anniversary, is September the 3rd.
Wait, I got a question before you go any further. I got a question.
Okay.
Was I an oops or not?
Well, in our day, we didn't plan pregnancies, or we didn't try to prevent or whatever. It just happened. And one thing I want to say too is that all four of you were born before I was 30,
Yep.
because you were born September the 1st, and my birthday when I was 30 was in December.
Yep.
So I had four kids before I was 30 years old. But back in our day, you didn't try not to get pregnant, or you wanted to get pregnant or whatever. You just had the babies as they came. And it just so happened that y'all were 2, 3, and 4 years apart.
Yeah.
But then after you were born, then we just didn't have any more.
Yeah. I understand that.
And of course, you were born, you and your brother were born here in Pierrepont, and your other two siblings were born in Houston, where I grew up. I went to a Catholic school through the 8th grade, where we had nuns. They had a convent right there by the school, and had to walk to school. There was no such thing as school buses in our day. And then after Catholic school, though, I went to public school because the Catholic high school was so far away, and you'd have to have your own transportation, and there's no way you could walk or even ride a bus. You'd have to have your own car. And naturally, in Mom and Dad had only one vehicle, and Daddy drove it to work every day. Mama didn't drive. And at the time, I didn't drive either. I didn't learn to drive till after Debbie was born. But so that's kind of the basic thing. I went to high school. I didn't no extra activities and all this kind of stuff. Didn't belong to the band or anything like that. But I did graduate with honors. I was in the National Honor Society. And 3 months after I graduated from high school, well, your dad and I got married. So.
Okay, tell the story about the car. When you and him were riding the car and you flipped it.
Yeah, we were. That was right after we were. That was when we were first married, and I was trying to drive a little bit. Sometimes I would, drive around the block or something. I wanted to learn to drive, and we were coming. We were going home from. We had come to Louisiana to visit Mama and Papa, Pops, your dad's mom and dad.
Mm-hmm.
We were on our way back to Houston, and Dad was real sleepy or something, so he told me, he said, there's no traffic on the road and all that, why don't you drive a little while? Well, here I didn't have a driver's license or anything, but I was driving. But we came, this road that we were on, they were working on the side of it, and it had a big drop on the side. And the wheel went off of the road, and trying to bring it back on, went all the way on the other side of the road, we hit 3 pine trees and flipped over on the top. But I got pinned in the seat, but Daddy managed to jump out and come around, and he got me out, and people started stopping and all that, but by that time we were both out of the car.
When was that? 19 what?
That was, I'm trying to think if we were,
Well,
that was, I think we were living in Savannah at the time, Savannah, Georgia.
So
and we had Daddy had come back.
The late 50s, right?
Huh?
The late 50s, right?
Yeah.
Well, and so that happened, and then when I was born, Grandma and Pop and Stevie were coming to see me was it a month later? Well, no,
You were exactly
a month.
a month old, yeah.
And then and where was it, in Plaquemine?
In Plaquemine, yeah.
They got in an accident and
Uncle Bubba and Aunt Pat, your Aunt Pat at the time, and the three boys, their three boys were coming. They were coming to see Barry because they hadn't seen him yet. They were coming from Houston, and Pop was driving, and a big truck turned in front of him without giving a signal, and he hit him. And Uncle Bubba's middle son, Stevie, was killed in the car accident.
And Joe was hurt. And, Chris went through the windshield. Chris is a cousin.
He had his face
Stevie's
all.
brother.
He had his face all
And
cut
Joe
up.
broke his arm and leg or something, and Grandma got hurt too.
Yeah.
So it was a and then they ended up buying. Long story short, but they ended up buying the car, which I remember a lot from Grandma and Pop. It's the white Pontiac that they had. They ended up buying it here in Plaquemine, and so the car's as old as I am. Uncle Bubba still has it.
So they could get back home because the car was completely declared a total.
So fast forward a little bit, Pop used to let us drive in Houston. He'd take us when we go visit. We go to Houston all the time to visit. It's kind of funny because we used to go there to visit. Now I live there, and I come here to visit. But he used to let us as kids sit on his lap and drive around the neighborhood. We did that a lot. It was pretty cool. It was pretty fun. All right, and it was that car. I remember that. I don't think everybody else knew that he was letting us do that, because I don't think Grandma
No,
would like
I don't
that
think
too
I
much.
knew that.
But he did it.
I don't think I was aware of that
If you
either.
ask Gary and Larry and Debbie, he did all of us like that. You'd go out and just ride around the block. He'd give you the wheel, and he'd do the brakes and the gas. But
Mentioning going back and forth to Houston too, because Debbie and Larry were born in Houston, and Gary and Barry were born in Louisiana. So that was, and Dad was born in Louisiana. I was born in Texas. So every time we'd go, we'd be going to Houston when we'd cross over the Sabine River into Texas. The three of us would let out, "Oh, it smells so good." Coming back,
we would all hold our breath for as long
Yeah,
as
and
we could
then-
going into Texas, because we were born here.
and then coming back, well, then the other three would
Then
take
we would-
over.
coming back, we crossed the border, and then we would breathe, and now we can breathe. Yeah, it's so kind of corny, but we did it every trip. We didn't have that
And
was
then,
our
of
entertainment.
course, too, we didn't have a big vehicle, so I think three of y'all always sat in the back, and maybe one of us, because we didn't use seatbelts at that time either.
Yep.
So one would usually sit up in the front. Well, when you were real little, it was always you. But I remember this. Maybe that's when we had our station wagon.
It was.
We were driving to Houston, and this song had just come out, and Barry was singing away, and we didn't know what the heck is he singing. Papa, mow, mow. And we all looked, what the world is he doing? And then a little bit later on, it came on the radio. It was the
Oak Ridge Boys.
Oak Ridge Boys had come out with a song, and they were singing Papa, mow, mow. So we figured out what the heck Barry was doing. But
we made a lot of trips to Houston as a kid. That every summer we'd go spend some time there. So, Grandma and Grandpa's house is still there, but they're redoing that whole area, and it's that house is still standing, built in 1920 whatever. And there's $1 million mansions now in that area, and the cost to buy a house there is millions.
it's close to the downtown area, and where a lot of people work now. Because I remember even going to school, and we could walk 1 block to Studewood, which was the main strip through there, and the city bus ran there every so many minutes, and you could catch that bus, and in about 15 minutes you were downtown. So people rode the bus. They didn't drive the cars too much. So, and when I worked after I graduated from high school, I got a job at a bank in the bookkeeping department, and that's what I did. I rode every day to work and back, and it was the same people. And you get on the bus, they all knew you because all of these people were going to work, so everybody was big friends. Oh, good morning, and all this stuff, so. But Then Daddy was transferred, because he was in the Air Force at the time. He was transferred to Savannah, Georgia, so we moved there. And after he got discharged and we came back to Houston, well, I was pregnant with Debbie. And we lived about 5 years in Houston, where Debbie and Larry were both born, and then we moved here to Louisiana.
I was the first one, I think, who went to kindergarten here out of the family. I didn't have kindergarten before I started. Went to kindergarten, carpooled with the folks around. Did that. Growing up, let's see, I mean, played basketball, played football, was in the band, did all those kinds of things. Played Little League Baseball, which was my favorite thing.
One thing I think we don't really mention too much, Daddy considers himself a Cajun, which he is. He speaks French. His father didn't speak any English at all, so he and I had a hard time communicating. But his mother could speak English. But Papa and I, he just kind of laughed, you know. But I never did pick up any of the language, and none of you kids did either.
Nope. I remember one time going. Dad sent me. I was probably 7 or 8 at the time. Go get a hoe from Papa because he needed it for the garden, and they lived right up front and in the wash shed. So I'll run over there. And I said, Papa, yep, I need a hoe. So he gave me a hose pipe. And then he gave me something else. And then we never could get to the hoe, what a hoe was. And I finally did this, and then he gave me the hoe. It was kind of funny because... So I remember, and I heard when Larry was talking about the garden and all, and Mama and Papa. I remember a lot growing up working with Mama and Papa in the garden and making sure we watered the plants and kept them bug free and that kind of thing. And it's kind of funny because I like to garden now, and I learned a lot as a kid from them doing that. Getting off the school bus and hating the tractor, opening up the rows with the 20,000 tons of potatoes that we used to do, which was explained by Larry. But we learned how to grow a bunch of different things here, and I remember all that stuff. Some from Mama, some from Papa, some from Dad, some from you.
It's strange though. Out of all the 4 kids growing up and working in the garden and all this stuff, he's the only one that picked it up to where he enjoys doing that. Yep. Working in the garden.
Yep.
And Debbie has a few flowers planted and all that, but none of the others really took a liking to any, outside stuff like that at all. Although, the other 2 boys picked up a lot of stuff from their dad because they were old enough to be right there when he'd work on cars or something, and he'd ask them for a wrench or something. Well, they knew exactly what to give him and all. But Barry was younger, so he
picked up more than you think.
He pretty much.
I just
kind of hung back.
I was different. They're more mechanically inclined and more interested in that, and I wasn't. But didn't mean I didn't pick a lot of that up, because I did. And
I remember them wanting to go into the electrical field, and and that's absolutely something you did not want any part of.
Nope.
So you went a different direction, but turned out really good for you too. So,
yep.
But we didn't push y'all to do what if y'all didn't want to do something in particular. I remember I used to tell Debbie all the time that she needed to have some typing, and boy, she wouldn't take typing in school for anything. Now, with the computer and all that, it's so much like typing and all that. Well, actually, you didn't know how to type, and you still don't either.
I still don't.
And yet, you had to pick up fooling with computers and all. It's so much like typing.
I know how to type my own way. And look, I get out type, and I'm not a trained typist ever, but I've been doing this for 25, 30 years, and I can out-type people that learn in high school. I can out-type them with my 4 fingers.
Yeah.
thumbs
Yeah.
and indexes, and that's how I type.
That's
And
how
I
he
can fly
types.
on a keyboard.
Yeah.
But I didn't take any of those kind of courses in high school for prep for college, and I didn't take any of those in college. But I can get by and type.
Yes. You learned to drive before you got your like the rest of them at home around here, or did you learn in driver's ed?
No, we had, if you remember that blue Chevy. It was I forgot the name of the car. It was blue station wagon looking thing. We used to drive. It wasn't licensed for the road, but Dad had bought it, and we drove it all around here in the yard in the pasture. You remember that blue thing? That's what I learned how to drive, because we would use it to run to the back. We'd use it to come back up here, and we would just. That's where I learned to drive. And then Papa's truck in the garden, like Larry was saying, learn how to shift that thing and in the yard. So I learned to drive in the yard. I did take driver's ed, but I was driving here first.
Yeah, but that's what
In
I
the yard.
thought all of you pretty much learned.
Of course, we learned how to do lawnmowers and riding lawnmowers, and we learned how to drive tractors. Because I used to drive the tractor too. That's what we learned first around here. And then I took formal driver's ed just because it was required, and at 15 I did get my
Well,
license.
to get for young, yeah, you could get your license much younger now than than you can now.
Yeah.
You could, at
But
15.
I totally knew how to drive when I was in driver's ed, because we already did it.
Yeah. Right, but it was you all of you took the driver's ed class because it helped us with the insurance too. If y'all took driver's ed, it was almost a required something or another. So,
Now, just thinking back to a lot of things that we did, we fished a lot, did a lot of especially me. I think as Dad, his jobs got a little easier on shifts, we used to go fishing when you get back from work, launch the boat in the backyard and go catch as many bass and sockeye as we want. Did that quite often. And then we, as I grew up and got out the house, we would start go saltwater fishing. But fishing was a big part, I think, of us growing up, because we did a lot of that. Did some minor hunting as a kid, but we did it's not something that none of us really stayed with a whole bunch. I don't think Dad was an interested hunter type.
no, he never did care for
But,
hunting. He loved
but
fishing.
but fishing he liked. So we did a lot of that.
But all of you kids, y'all didn't move out of the house, actually, though, until y'all were married. Well, yeah, you did.
I moved out before I was married.
Yeah, you did, because you were working in,
I worked at Cy, and I graduated from college and moved to Houma and lived there for a while in an apartment by myself. So
yeah.
I did move out, but it wasn't long after that got married.
And then one night you called and told us that you were in the hospital. And you had been hurting so bad and all that. And we asked, well, what's wrong with you? And you said the doctor told you your appendix was about to rupture. So he had to have an emergency.
Well, what happened?
Appendectomy.
What happened there was I thought I was having just overnight. I wasn't feeling good, and I thought it was just my stomach was upset, and taking Pepto-Bismol. And finally, I called Debbie. I told her I wasn't feeling too good, and she was the one that made me go to the doctor. And so
The emergency room.
No, I went to the doctor.
Oh, okay.
And it's Holt Haydell, Dr. Haydell in Houma, and then he did an exam on me, and he checked my prostate, and it hurt like hell. And he said, "Oh boy, yeah boy, that is your appendix." And then they sent me home to go get my clothes to go to the hospital, and then I was taking my time, and then they practically dispatched the darn police after me because I wasn't getting there fast enough. And then I finally got there, and that's what it was. And appendicitis is back then, or a big jagged scar, and it takes a lot longer to recover than it does today.
Well,
But
actually,
that was right when I first started my job at Saya, and I was 20 years old. and,
actually, you were the only one of any of us that ever had our appendix removed. None of the others
Yep.
ever did. you were always very susceptible to lightning too.
A little bit.
Uh, when you and Dad would go fishing or something, if this was lightning or rain, started raining, or if it was lightning or something, you had to try to get out of the way because
I've had 2 close calls. When Larry built his house, of course, we all helped on that. And at the stage of the house where it's just the foil siding before you put the siding,
before you
I'm
put
sitting. We're taking a break. It's mid-afternoon in the summer, and
it
it's
was
hot,
raining. It was
and
raining.
It starts raining, and I'm sitting reading a letter from one of my friends that moved away on college, Dwayne Daig, actually. And I'm reading the letter, and it's lightning strikes in the next lot over, which happens to be Gary's potential lot, which was probably 50 yards away, I guess, give or take. And when the lightning struck there, it discharges, and it caught me indirectly. So I jumped up, and then nobody knew what happened. I jumped up, and then I slouched down,
You couldn't speak.
and I couldn't speak. So they threw me in the car, and Mom took me to the doctor, not the hospital. He took me to the doctor, Bolot, if I'm not mistaken. And my blood pressure was off the chart. But that was number one. That was when I was probably 17. And then probably when I was 21, 22, I'm working at work at SCI. I'm a dispatcher, and I have a desk with a glass top, and I'm sitting there with my elbow. I'm resting my elbow on the phone because I'm talking to somebody. Lightning strikes the fence that's connected to the building, runs through me, and everybody in the office heard a big pow, and I pushed my chair away from my desk, and my hair was standing up. So I got, and then that desk, if you find that desk today, it has a burn mark where my elbow was. So that's strike number 2. I'm okay today. So a funny story is that I was playing golf with some buddies not too long after that, and I was a very serious golfer at that time, so we were playing a lot of it. And there's this particular island green. I hit the ball like 2 inches from the cup. It was a beautiful shot, middle of a pond, big lake, and lightning struck the lake right next to my ball. We were like 200 yards away. It was one of the best shots of my life. And I just jumped in the car and said, "Where you going?" I said, "I don't care about that ball. I'm leaving." Lightning struck too close to me, so I took it into the clubhouse, left that ball right where it was, and left my friends on the golf course. I don't take any chances because lightning close to me, I figured the third time would not be a good one.
And a few times, one time your daddy was fishing too, and the weather turned bad, and you were out running it in the boat.
That was me, him, and Kevin.
Yeah.
We were in a lake, and lightning strikes very close, probably 20 yards away, and we're in an aluminum boat, and a big storm runs in, and lightning struck, and not a word was said. Everybody starts reeling in their lines as fast as they could. Dad jumped in the driver's seat. We all hatched down. Nobody said a word, and we just hauled butt as far away from that storm as we could. Well, long story short is we got lost. and the way that we actually got to where we were, it probably had 2 inches of water. So it was a really kind of funny story, but
Y'all were trying to get out of there though, because of the
that
lightning.
was way too close for our comfort. That's the lightning stories, yep.
So, we were talking about learning to drive and all this stuff. When y'all never had a car of your own until you graduated from college, and y'all, we had Daddy had a truck and I had a car, so y'all would. But y'all needed to use the family vehicle.
Well, we the way y'all did, everybody, you kind of give Debbie, Larry, and Gary all choices, and they made their various choices of what they wanted to do. I ended up kind of had the same choice, but until then, we kind of got some vehicles for me to use. One was Carol's old Bug that she had, a '72 Beetle. It was an automatic stick, which is a little different Bug than normal. So her and Larry had it, and then we bought it for me to use, and I remember because I actually had it painted. It was a white Bug, and then I had it painted. Louis Boudreaux painted it for me.
Gary's friend.
And then I put a very good stereo in it and all that, and I had that Bug for a while, and it was pretty cool. But I remember that it's 1972 with it was an automatic, so it didn't have a clutch, but you had to shift from first to second, and reverse was a little different. Just a very unique Bug. I had that, and then I had a little Sunbird for a little while, and then we ended up when I graduated, we bought you guys helped me with. I bought a
We put the
Mustang,
down payment on it
on a Ford Mustang.
on a Ford Mustang, and you went to work, and then you paid the notes. You paid it
Yeah.
out yourself.
Yeah, so Mustang was technically my first car.
Gary and Larry had their choice when they graduated. They took the family car. So we had to Dad and I had to get another car.
And Debbie took.
Debbie
me and
decided
Debbie took the new car,
Debbie,
and they took the family
decided-
car.
that she wanted to get a new car too. So we put the down payment on it for her, and she finished paying for hers.
She bought a Cougar XR7
And then
time.
you did the same thing when you graduated. You wanted a new vehicle, so
Well, I like Mustangs. That was what I wanted. That's what I
yeah.
did. And I had another since. I had one in 2000.
Then you worked for Saya for how many years?
Saya was my first job out of college. When Saya was hiring, everybody that was in my major, they came to the placement office, and they were going to have one opening, and I ended up getting the opening.
That was a job fair, they called it at the time.
It was a through placement office, and it was like a little job fair. And I got the job, and everybody else ended up moving out of state, so I was pretty lucky. But I worked for Saya for 12 years, but they ended up moving us to Georgia. So I went with Saya halfway through that, and lived in Georgia for a while. And then I moved companies, but I stayed with them for 12 years, and then I went for Logistics.com, which was the software provider that Saya was using. I did that for a couple of years. It's just
Then you moved on to
Ohio, worked for Dayton Freight for a couple of years. Then I went to, Kathleen and I got married when I was in Georgia, so let me back up a little bit. So in 2001 is when we got married. And then we moved right after that to Ohio. Spent 2 years there, and then we moved to New Jersey, and that's where we had all our kids. So we have 3 kids: Emily, Jason, and Nicholas. And
when the
Jason,
twins were just a month old, though, you moved to Houston.
Yeah, the boys, they're twins, and when they were a month old, we moved to Houston. That's where we've been, and where we are today. So kind of been all over the place. And now I live where Mom grew up, and Mom lives where I grew up.
But through all of this, even all of their moving and all wherever they were, Dad and I would be there to help.
Yeah,
we've
we've
helped them move, and
I've had built. I've had a house, bought a house in Louisiana. I bought a house and built a house in Georgia, bought a house and then built another house in Ohio. Then we bought a house in New Jersey, and then we bought a house in Houston, and then built another house in Houston. So we've been through a few houses.
You said a little back where Saya moved you to Georgia, Atlanta, and to move you over there, Larry and I. We drove the rental truck, I think, for you to
we had
take your
rented a
few
rider
stuff.
truck. Yeah,
And then you and Rocky drove your a truck you had at the time.
right.
And so all 4 of us went to Atlanta to help
Which
him
is
move.
the same truck that Jared Gold now has.
Yes.
That truck that was a 1994, I drove that thing to Georgia, and then Dad ended up having it for a long time now, and Gary ended up with it, and now it's still
Jared.
going. Jared's got it.
But anyways, we the 4 of us, the 3 of us went with you to Atlanta, and the first time I ever had been on an airplane was Barry and I flew back home, but it was a small.
It was called Value Jet.
Value Jet at that time. It was just kind of a small airplane, and I wouldn't sit by the window. And I'd sit in the seat by the aisle, and I wouldn't open my eyes because I was so scared. I'd never flown
That was
before,
Granny's
and I was
first-
scared to death.
First trip on an airplane, and
My very first time on a plane.
But I was with you. You weren't by yourself.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's the only. Yeah. That's the only way, because that was the only way I could get back home. Because, but then the day before, Larry and Rocky flew back home. And it was a very turbulent day. and they said the plane was kind of shaking, and they said, "Oh, your mama's gonna have a fit."
We had a smooth ride. Ours wasn't bad.
And the next day, Barry and I flew, but we had a. It wasn't bad at all. We didn't have that turbulence and all that stuff. Thank God, because if we had
There's another story. When I was living in Georgia, it was Mother's Day weekend, and I was flying back home.
Yes.
And I was flying a Value Jet, and that same day, a Value Jet crashed in Florida. And Mama looks at the TV, and she knows I'm in the air.
We didn't know.
It said Value Jet crash, details in 10 minutes or whatever.
We didn't know if he was on that plane or not
at that very time. And they actually told us in the air, which is odd that the other plane crashed, because the crew was all upset and all that, crying and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that kind of happened on Mother's Day weekend. I remember that. That was probably 1996, I think.
It was about an hour or two later before we actually found out that that wasn't the plane you were on, and we
could have been.
Scared. We were in Houma at the time at a buffet. All the family and all, we had gotten together for Mother's Day, and we were sitting there waiting, and all of us were scared to death, thinking that that was the plane that you were coming in on.
Well, it was a plane that came out of Atlanta, and it just happened to be one going to Florida. And Value Jet doesn't have a very big fleet, so there was probably maybe one or two other planes in the air at the time with Value Jet. So the chances were strong.
Yes.
But I remember that because the crew was all upset, and they told us about it. So I ended up not flying back home, and I ended up getting driven back home. But
as I said too, though, that the time I flew back from Atlanta was my first plane flight.
Yeah.
But actually, I flew 2 or 3 other times.
You flew by yourself a couple of times, I believe.
Didn't
you fly from New Jersey back?
Yeah, but one time it was with Kathleen's mom and daddy.
Yes, you flew with Mr. Roy and Miss Rose to come up to New Jersey, and
Debbie one time.
And you and Debbie flew somewhere. I don't know if it was Ohio or whatever, but
it was when I think when Emily was born.
Debbie
was already there.
That would have been New Jersey.
And Daddy brought me up there, and I stayed for a few weeks, and then a while, and Debbie flew back with me, something or another like that. She came up. But so I flew about 3 times in my life, but it's been a long time now, so I don't know. I guess if I'd get on a plane again, I'd be scared to death again, because it's been a few years now since I've flown.
I fly a lot,
and things are so different, too. I mean, so I don't know. But you can't get your daddy on a plane. He'll drive anywheres. No matter where you'd live, he'd drive up there. But don't tell him to get on a plane. And he worked on airplanes in the Air Force.
Yeah.
He was an electrician on airplanes. And he even flew to Africa on a TDY thing on a Air Force plane, but yet he will not fly on a commercial airliner.
Right.
So
I remember as a kid, just some odd things to talk about is that I played a lot of baseball. And you made pretty much every game that I played. Now I could always hear you above the crowd cheering for me.
Do you remember the time y'all were playing? Wasn't it a tournament game or something? And your team here in Pierre Part won or something. And y'all play. You hit a home run.
It was All-Stars in 1978. I made the All-Star team, and we were playing Gonzales, which was much bigger than us, and I hit a grand slam. And I was the smallest guy on the team, practically.
And one of your friends on the team went and found your ball, and they all signed it for you.
Actually, Mr. CJ, Travis's uncle, went to get the ball, because I hit it into the canal, and he got it out, and we signed it. And yeah, I still have the ball today. Yeah. And you made actually a trophy out of it.
Well, yeah.
But I played ball from Little League all the way till I was about 35 years old, I think. After I played baseball in high school, and then I turned it into softball, playing a lot of that until I was of age. So
at one time, you considered even being a professional ball player.
Yeah, I broke my leg in high school, and that kind of changed that whole notion. Yeah. So after that,
you didn't play in college at all, though.
I didn't have my
on the
speed.
College team. I mean, you didn't play for the college.
I didn't even try, because once I broke my leg, I didn't have the speed, and that would have been my ticket, and I knew that. So without speed, there's no way. I'm undersized, and so that's kind of how that went. But I still played ball because I played in a little bit of a. I played in a league in Georgia that's like former minor leaguers, former major leaguers played in for a little bit. It's like a semi-pro league. I played there for one season, and that was kind of fun. But yeah. Played in the band through college. Did that.
Not all the way through. You kind of dropped out before the end of college.
Yeah. I quit halfway through it. Yeah. I decided I wanted to do other things.
Your thing was you wanted to play trumpet, just like your older brother had. Larry played trumpet. Well, that's what you decided you wanted to do. Gary played trombone. Of course, Debbie had played a flute. But you decided you wanted a trumpet too. So.
Mm-hmm.
But. Okay, so. As we said, he moved from mostly his first years were always in the like freight business. I mean, he worked for freight lines. And when he and Kathleen moved to New Jersey, that's where his 3 children were born. So I was always there, right there with them. And then, of course, when y'all, your company was about to be sold, you thought you had heard, but you decided to move on to something different. So you got a job around Houston.
Mm-hmm.
So you decided to move, and the twins were only 4 weeks old. So you'd always pay for them to help you out, but Larry flew over there, and Kathleen's friend Tammy flew over there, and she had van at the time. So Larry, you weren't even there. You had to stay a week or two after. You had to stay a week or two there. So Larry drove the van, and Tammy helped out with the 3 children, and so they drove you.
Yeah.
I mean, they.
One of the things that's Gary, Larry, and Debbie kind of stayed closer to home. I lived in Houma. That's not a major move. It's still close, an hour away. But then I'm the only one that ended up moving away and out. And it got a little tough at times, I guess, because it's so far away, especially when we got to New Jersey. It's a lot. It's not a drive anymore. You have to get on a plane. It's not easy to get to. You guys still... you still ended up coming around and helping out on the move and trying to visit as much as you could, and we tried to come down as much as we could. How'd you guys like that? Me moving around like I did.
Well, it was your work, and you it's where you were working, so we didn't really. Kind of missed you being around, like all the others. But it's not that we really said, oh, she wouldn't live there or whatever.
Well, here's a funny little story. I remember, it's just funny because I was living in Ohio, and I remember we talked about various things, and this is before I had even a chance to go to New Jersey. I remember me and you having a conversation over the phone, and we talked about. Yeah, I said, you go moving places and moving here or there. I said, yeah, New Jersey is one place I just won't go. She said, why? I said, I think that's the armpit of the country. I'll never go there. I think 2 weeks later, I called you and told you I'm moving to New Jersey. and because the job was just too good to pass up, I ended up going to New Jersey. I ended up being a vice president there, so I don't regret moving there. But I don't think it was, I still consider it an armpit. It's not our favorite place that we ever lived. It's part of the experience.
We tease him, Dad and I sometimes tell him, his sons now is 2016, and his twins, the boys are 9 and Emily is 11, and they were born in New Jersey. We ask him sometimes, when are you going to take those kids back to see where they were born? He said, "Well, wait till they're old enough to go themselves. So I don't want to go there."
I said I didn't leave anything there that I need. And I didn't lose anything there. I don't want to go back.
I guess the
It's a
kids are
different
gonna-
place. We're from the South, and
The people there were really not friendly. On the roads too. You think people over here don't let you get, when you're driving and all that they're kind of people over there. Gosh, they were just terrible. And even neighbors living right next door to you, they weren't friendly.
yeah,
People just weren't.
Houston's
friendly
a
there.
much better
You
spot.
go to the store or something too, and people didn't even talk to you. They could run over you with their basket or whatever, and they wouldn't even look at you. So we just, that was just one thing we just wasn't used to, because people in the South are so much more friendly. And boy, Ohio wasn't too good either. I mean, but New Jersey, I think, was the worst.
We like Houston, and that's where, it's neat being back in the place where I have relatives, where you grew up and that kind of thing. And it's close enough to Louisiana. So, you never lose. Being somebody that moved away from Louisiana, you never lose the sense of feeling that you're from Louisiana and that's where you grew up, and you always consider yourself a Cajun and from Louisiana, no matter where you go. I'm in Texas now. I'm a transplant, but Louisiana, I still root for all the same sports teams. I was a big Saints fan, big LSU fan. It doesn't matter. Well, in fact, when I moved to Atlanta, I couldn't even root for the Falcons because I hate them. So I don't take up to the local teams necessarily. It's always been the Saints and LSU all the way through, and as I moved around the country.
Well, he's talking transplant. Well, that's what I am here, and I've lived here in Louisiana more years than I ever lived in Texas. And of course, I still consider myself a Texan. But to say that, well, I tell everybody the first 2 years we moved over here, I thought I would die. We had Debbie and Larry. They were 4 and 2, and everybody at that time spoke French. I mean, when the first thing that would come out of their mouth would be something French, and I didn't understand a word they said. And Dad still says now, people are friendly here, but yet he still says that people think of me as an outsider because I wasn't born here. But I don't think so. I think now people,
It's been too
it's
many
not so
years
much
now.
like
Yeah.
that anymore.
No,
It used
it's
to be way back when he was young and all that. People used
Well,
to.
people weren't transient then. They didn't
They're
move
right.
like that.
They didn't leave the towns too much. But to tell you the truth, I love it here. I love the fact that we're not crowded in here. That the property we've got. I just love the place where we're living now. And most of my relatives now back in Texas, I've got cousins, but I have on Daddy's side, I have one one aunt by marriage, and on Mama's side, I have one uncle still living. But other than that, it's cousins and like that, and some of them I keep in touch with some, but then there's cousins here and there that, I don't even know where they are or whatever. But so I really don't have a lot of relatives left in Texas. But
what I remember from growing up, when we go to Houston with my grandma and pop, Grandpa used to take us to Astroworld. I remember doing that a lot. He used to take us and let us ride all the rides. That was pretty fun. But I remember Grandma saying, used to say, we went out one time to the Galleria. You know the Galleria, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Galleria is out in the country. And I remember it from the heights. It took like an hour to get there. And today, that's where my office building is, in the Galleria. And it's like in Houston, it's kind of different. It's kind of like a mini downtown. It's very, very developed with a lot of big, tall skyscrapers. And it's 15 minutes from the heights. It just seemed like it was a world away when I was a kid, and it was undeveloped, and it was out in the country, because I remember literally driving out in where there's nothing. All of a sudden, there's this
just
building,
pastures.
pasture in the middle of the building. Now you go to Galleria, is loaded with is just a center of a lot of businesses, and I work in the Galleria. I remember Grandma talking about, we're going out in the cow pasture, going to the Galleria.
I remember when we're talking cow pastures now, even when I was younger, growing up, and then even after being married and all that, Mom and Pop used to go out in these places where he called them cow pastures. We'd go out and pick blackberries because they had wild blackberries growing all over everywhere, you know. And Mom and Dad loved to pick blackberries,
They called them
and I did
dewberries.
too. Huh?
Called them dewberries.
Yeah, they called them
Because Aunt
dewberries.
Josie used to call them dewberries too, and I
Dewberries,
remember
yeah.
her talking about that.
Yeah.
I also remember Grandma when I think it was me and Debbie. If y'all would bring two of us, and we'd stay there for 3 weeks at a time in the summers, and in the next year it'd be maybe Larry and Gary. But Grandma taught us how to speak. Was trying to teach us how to speak Polish.
She how to count. Debbie
How
can
to count.
still count a little bit.
And so she taught us how to count to 20 in Polish. And here's the funny thing. I remember 4 numbers. And I'm going to tell you why I remember. Because it was 4 numbers. It was 6 and 7 and 16 and 17. And the reason is kids, picture of kids about 7 years old when she tells you this. 6 is shittim, and 7, or it might be 7 and 8. I might be wrong, but it's in this sequence. Shittim was 1, like 7. It was 7 and 8. Shittim was 7, and 8 was washim. And we used to be able to count all the way to 20, but I don't remember the rest. I remember those two, and 17 and 18 was shittim neister and washim neister. I remember those 4 numbers. Why? Because Grandma used to say this. Remember these 2 numbers because first you shit them, and then you have to wash them. And as a kid, we thought that was so hilarious. I bet you if you go ask Debbie today, and
But she does. Just a while back, she told me.
If I tell her what is shittim and washim, she'll know what that is.
The reason we're saying Polish here is because my grandmother, my mother's mother, was born in Poland, and they immigrated from Poland when she was a young girl, and then she married my grandfather, but he was of Polish descent too, but he wasn't born in Poland, but she actually was. So I didn't really know her. I knew my grandfather, Mama's daddy, real well, but my grandmother died when I was probably 2 years old. But Mom says that Grandma was like Jerry's daddy over here only spoke French. Well, she only spoke Polish. And I actually have a prayer book that Mama had, and now I have it. It's in Polish. And of course, I can't read any of it because I never learned to.
So Grandma knew some Polish, but
yeah, they used to speak a little bit of Polish.
It's the same thing on French on this side. It's getting lost on the generations because I used to better at least kind of recognize some of the conversations Dad had with Mama and Papa in French. Now it's all gone, and that's all I remember on the Polish side from because Grandma taught us a little more than just counting. She would say some other words, but those 4 I remember, and that's it. And I don't think I'll ever forget those 4 words because it just stuck. But that was an interesting story. So
like I said, I don't remember my grandmother. The one thing that I do remember, and it's strange why a young child would remember this. We were still living on the farm in Anderson when Mom and Dad got married. They lived on my grandfather's my mama's daddy's place, and they raised cotton. So Daddy tried farming there for a few years, but one year the crop just really failed. It was a bad year. It was dry and everything, and so he decided to move away. But before we moved, I remember being on the front porch of the house where we lived out there, and it stayed there for years. And another aunt and uncle lived in that house too. So I saw the house quite a lot growing up and all that. So I knew that we had lived there, and I remember Mom holding me and crying, and I think that's when her mother died. And why you remember something like that? Because like I said, I don't even remember my grandmother. And there's only maybe 1 or 2 pictures of her as far as to know what she looked like. Because they didn't take very many pictures in those days. But there is 1 or 2 that Mom had. But I do remember that, Mom holding me and she was crying. But then my grandfather, her father, he after Grandma died, Mom was married. Mom, but I think there was only one or two of the kids because there was. I think there was 10 in the family, boys and girls. And Mama was married, and she had one brother that was older than her. She was the second oldest in the family. So the other kids, Grandpa was kind of trying to raise them, and Mama would kind of help out. But as the kids got older, they didn't want to stay on the farm, so they'd come into Houston to find jobs and go to work and all this. They had very little education. They didn't go to high school or anything like that. They went to school a little bit, but they could read and write, and that was about it. And I remember 3 or 4 of at different times, the aunts and uncles living with us and working until they'd get married, and then they'd move out. But one especially was Uncle Floyd. He went into the army, and he was in Germany when they were fighting. And when he came back home, well, he lived with us for a few years until he got married. He was so not that he's only a couple of years older than your daddy, so he was close to my age, so he kind of became more like a brother to me, like Uncle Bubba and all, than an uncle, because he lived with us 2 or 3 years, I guess, and then he got married. But yeah, I do remember aunts and uncles living, Mama's brothers or sisters living with us for a while because they'd want to leave the farm and come and work in Houston. So now on Daddy's side, it was the same thing. I remember his daddy though, because I was about 12 or 13 when he died, so I kind of remember him. But then after Pop's daddy died, well, his sisters that lived in Fort Worth, they took Grandma to live with them over there. So we'd go visit and all that. And I can remember Grandma Hyman some, but of course in those days they didn't live to be as old as people are living to be now either. Yeah. Dad's father probably was in his 60s, and Grandpa was, I don't know exactly, but he was in his 70s. They weren't that old when they died. My daddy sometimes, after he retired, sometimes he and Grandma would get on each other's nerves, so Pop would come over here and stay a few weeks or something, and then we'd go back home. When you were going to college at the time, you remember the time we brought Pop here, and he had picked up some earthworms somewheres.
Oh, yeah.
And he had them in a bucket in the house.
In the house. And ended up all down the hall. When
Barry got up one morning to go to school, and he came down the hall.
I wasn't in college. I was still high school.
Oh, in high school? Okay. And he saw those worms crawling all over the hall. He told Pop, he said, "You better get those things up from there before Mama sees them." So here they were, both of them, trying to pick up all those worms crawling all over the house.
Yep.
But too, it was mentioned too, I think Larry and all of them, they mentioned that Dad was one that came and helped Jerry build this house. Daddy wasn't a carpenter, and neither was Daddy, but somehow or another, neither was Jerry, but somehow or another they put the house together, and they're still living in it. So, but Daddy was, my dad was a welder by trade, and he taught Jerry to weld some. So, but my dad, he didn't go to school. He couldn't read or write. He could sign his name, and that was it. But he knew how to read figures. He could count money and stuff like that. He knew his figures like that, and he could read a ruler and things like that. So he learned to weld. And during the Second World War, Dad worked in the shipyards. So he wasn't drafted into the Army because he was working in a shipyard. So that's what kept him out of the service at the time. Because back then it didn't matter if you knew how to read or write. They'd take you anyways. But no, so that's kind of the thing. And in fact, Daddy was about 77 or 78. He developed colon cancer. So he needed to take treatments and all that, but we were living here, and I had all the kids were young, going to school and all that. I couldn't go and stay over there with them, and he needed somebody that could bring him back and forth to treatments because Mama couldn't drive. So what we did, we brought him here, and I got in touch with I called different doctors all over to see if they'd take Medicare and all this. And a doctor at Oxner's, at the time it was one in Baton Rouge. And they accepted him, so I'd take him, I think it was like 3 times a week. I'd drive him to Baton Rouge for his treatments. He took like radiation, I think it was. But he only lived 7 months after that. They did surgery and all that on him. They did the surgery in Houston. Then we transferred him over here, and I took care of him. And but he'd get up and he'd love going outside and sitting outside and listening to the birds singing and all this. But this one Friday night, late, he told Jerry that he wasn't feeling that good and he didn't want to stay in bed. He wanted to come up in the living room and sit down in a recliner or something that maybe he would feel a little better. He wouldn't hurt so bad. So we said, okay, we'll bring you up front. So we both walked with him from the bedroom down the hall. And as he was walking down the hall, he told us, he says, I'm not going to live till morning. I said, oh, Dad, I said, you know, you're feeling really bad, but I said, you're going to get better. But that same night, we called our druggist because the doctor had prescribed for him, is it codeine, I think, that morphine, that they'd give you when you were hurting so bad like that. But his doctor had told us already that he did not have long to live, that his bowels would lock on him, and there wouldn't be a thing they could do. But so we called our druggist, and they didn't have any morphine here in Pierreport. But he went wherever, I don't know if it was to Donaldsonville or somewheres, and brought it back to us at home. And so we had the morphine to give to him. So Jerry sat in here with him, and Debbie had come to spend the weekend to kind of help out. So I went to bed. Debbie told me, she said, Mom, you go lay down and we'll sit here with Pop. So, and the first time in my life that I ever went and laid down with just my clothes on. I decided not to put my pajamas on that particular night. So I went and laid down for about an hour or two, and then Jerry and Debbie came in and told me that he had passed away. He passed away in this living room on my sofa. And he was 79 years old. I don't remember exactly. That's been...
1992.
Okay, 1992. So he's been dead a number of years. Then
23 years?
Mom was still living in Houston. She lived there a couple of years after he passed away, but then she started developing Alzheimer's. So we went and brought her over here. Were you still...
That's an hour.
Okay.
Were
sorry.
you still at home when we brought Grandma here, or were you?
No.
No, you were married already. Okay. So I brought Mom here, and she lived in the apartment where Larry and Carol lived in at first when they got married, and she lived here 10 years, and then she passed away. She was 90 though. Mom passed away at age 90. And all you boys were pallbearers, huh?
Mm-hmm.
You and
Yep.
we all went to Houston because they were both of them. Both Mom and Dad were buried in Houston, and all you boys were pallbearers. So
That's it, Jared.
that's about the story of